podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Dunbar End podcast here on the Hibs Observer YouTube channel. I am, as ever, Jack Harris, and I am, as ever, joined by the Hibs Observer editor, Patrick McPartlin. It's a quiet week for Hibs coming up with no competitive football at the weekend, but it's not a quiet week at all here at the Hibs Observer with a lot going on behind the scenes and a lot to talk about on today's episode. We'll come up to Hibs weekend action with David Gray announcing a bounce fixture for the weekend, and we'll discuss that in a little bit of detail towards the end. But first, Patrick, you mentioned in our show notes, you've got Jamie McGrath equals Player of the Year contender. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that just off the back of a very good performance against Dundee at Dens Park last Saturday. And yeah, state your claim. What's your claim for Jamie McGrath's success, and what's he done so well for Hibs this season?
Yeah, I think anyone who's watched Jamie McGrath this season will be able to see where I'm coming from. I think he's been consistently one of Hibs' top performers. I think even when Hibs maybe aren't sort of performing to their best, I think he always tends to stand out as just being, sort of driving the team on. Never like he's never someone. I mean, not that you would sort of look for individuals who have been let the team down, but I think he's always someone who you can kind of count upon a little bit to make something happen. To maybe even if it's not getting a goal or an assist, it's certainly starting the moves that lead to it. And I think it has been a bit of an underwhelming season, based on how the last campaign went. But he is somebody who I think has kind of stepped up time and time again. I think the only real kind of problem I would say is just the injuries that he's had that have kept him out for a little bit of time. And you can only really imagine how much better things might have been if he hadn't had those sort of brief spells on the sidelines. I think his flexibility, his versatility is obviously marks him out as someone who can be used in a variety of positions, which we know David Gray likes. And I think it's you could go through a list of players who Hibs have signed from other teams in either the Scottish Premiership or the Scottish Championship, and broadly speaking, they have had success. I mean, Josh Mulligan's another obvious example in recent times, but it's just bringing people in who know the league, who understand what's expected of them at a club like Hibs, and McGrath is just such a good example of that, such a clear example of the kind of player that you want at your club technically, but also like his character as well, which we know is such a big thing for Hibs. Is also sort of a really It's the kind of player you want at your club, the sort of player who you can count upon to go and speak to the media after difficult results and not say anything they shouldn't in the heat of the moment. So I think like I said at the top of this, if you've watched him for Hibs any great amount this season, you'll know why I'm sort of saying what I'm saying about Player of the Year. In terms of anybody else, I just think Josh Mulligan might be in with a shout, but I think his injury layoff probably rules him out. Raphael Salinger is another one who you could probably count himself in with a chance. Apart from that, I think it maybe depends on, if somebody has a strong finish to the season, if they have a strong second half of the campaign, for instance. But beyond that, I mean, I just think, there have been a few injuries. There have been players who've sort of had dips in form, and, players who are maybe, there's maybe something missing from their overall performances across the piece. So, I think it would have to be Jamie McGrath for me, but Raphael Salinger so far. I mean, we are only just in March. There is a lot of football to be played, as we know. But the point is that McGrath has just been so influential and such a big hit so far that I think he probably has got it sewn up a couple of months ahead of schedule.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to talk about. You've stolen my next question as well. I shouldn't have told you. I shouldn't have briefed you on it beforehand. But yeah, I mean, the McGrath performance against Dundee. I mean, you talk about players that can sort of make that overall performance. I think we saw two real good sides to his game at Dens Park in the first half. He's obviously playing the role of creator. So I've been writing an article about Jamie McGrath for tomorrow, I think, and essentially it's looking at just the role he plays alongside. Well, he's got the passing with Dan Barlaser through to Nicky Cadden, and they have this really neat interchange. I think the first goal through Owen Elding, I think that's all made within about 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, McGrath, Cadden, I mean, they make those sort of like neat passes, working up along a sort of ladder towards and then the ball in. I think I said something like it was the most clinical that Hibs have looked in attack so far this season. Just how quick it goes from the half defence. Barlas is sort of the furthest player back at that point, just sort of slotting in between two centre backs, plays it forward, and then bang, straight away. As soon as they got the equaliser through Simon Murray, I think the pressure was on a bit, and there was less sort of space for Hibs to do that kind of neat one-touch passing that they were working on. I noticed in the warm-ups, and it seemed to work really well for that goal, but it just came under a little bit of pressure. But then in the second half, obviously you've got McGrath. Sorry, you have put in the notes. I keep thinking, trying to speak to you quickly. McGrath has the third and what we thought was going to be the decisive goal, when it's just that really little neat moment when he kind of slips between two players and then sets off a shot that, given where John McCracken is in the Dundee goal, it's just how hard he hits that, and it just goes sort of straight past him because he's right there. I mean, he's able to defend it, but yeah, he has this real technical quality, but also this kind of clinical finishing. And I think I completely agree with you that it's certainly in the running. I mean, Raf Salinger was the same. I would have put him as a choice as well. Maybe Grant Hanley too, I think, would be within that conversation. I mean, we'll get on to talk about the sort of negative sides of Hibs defending, but I think just for the composure that he's brought in. Last season, I think defensively Hibs were very good, but there were moments when there was sort of the deer in the headlights slightly. And I think what Hanley's done is he's come in, he's got a breadth of experience. And I think while he's been injured, he's definitely been missed, both as a starter and an option, just to sort of bring some depth and some quality to the centre-back position. But let's discuss goals in a minute, because that's a bit of a hot topic, sadly, unfortunately, especially in the wake of the game at Dens Park. Obviously, Dundee nabbing a point right at the end with that Cameron Congreve equaliser for 3-3. I don't want to take anything away from the quality of the Dundee goal, not Dundee United. Plenty of those to talk about as well. But the Dundee goal, I don't want to take away from the quality of Congreve's equaliser. But Patrick, I know you wrote for the site about Hibs and the stats behind the late goals. Tell us a little bit about what you wrote.
Yeah, I think we knew last season, certainly the first half of the campaign, that losing late goals was a bit of an Achilles heel for Hibs. They quite often lost late goals, which turned draws into defeats and wins into draws. And I think I can't remember the exact total for the points. It was something like, out of a potential 19 points, I think they maybe only took 5 or something primarily in the first half of the campaign last season. And I think that's that's been the real bugbear, I think, for Hibs fans. It's just sort of last season finished third, best of the rest, obviously had that 17-game unbeaten run. But if they'd just been able to sort of tighten things up a little bit in the first part of the season, then, who knows what might have been in terms of final points total and things like that. And we've also we've seen it this year as well. And I think the problem is that it's not been confined to just one part of the season. It's been kind of throughout, and it's really kind of it's been a bitter blow to take for them at times, especially when you consider that it was a late goal that knocked them out the Scottish Cup. We've obviously saw the late goals in Europe as well, and obviously most recently, as you say, Dundee, when Hibs did sort of very well to get themselves back into the game from 2-1 down. We've seen plenty of times this season where Hibs look dead and buried when they're 2-1 down and sort of going into the last 10 minutes of a game. But as I also said in that piece, Hibs have scored a fair few goals themselves in the last 10 minutes. It's just that defending them seems to be an issue. And I think I saw a few people criticising us after the Dundee game for being a bit too negative. So yes, Hibs did very well to get back into the game. I think I feel we probably said that. We'll go on to talk about subs and the impact that they've had, but when you look at That was, the Celtic game, subs coming off the bench, making an impact, and then the same against Dundee. And obviously the late goal is what spoils it, and that's what everyone's talking about. And it's the fact that it is the ninth, I think it's the ninth goal in the league that's been scored between like the 80th minute and the full-time whistle, which is not particularly bad compared to the rest of the league. It is sort of roughly mid-table. But I think when you compare that to the rest of the teams in the top six, it's what's clear is that they haven't conceded anywhere near as many goals in the sort of final 10 minutes plus of games. I think Rangers are the next team with it's 6 conceded, I think, in the last sort of 10 plus minutes. And everyone else up there is sort of 3, 4, 5, something like that. And again, it's just that, we've talked about the season being a bit of a missed opportunity for Hibs in terms of how Celtic and Rangers have been playing and the kind of issues they've been having. We've talked about everything being, I think, made a little bit worse by the form that Hearts are in. So good things aren't as good as they might be, and bad things are worse. Made a little bit worse. And I think that the bitter thing about Dundee was that there've been times when Hibs have sort of held on in games, and they've conceded late goals, and it's either been it's essentially been a loss of a victory, or they've contrived to lose a game rather than draw it. And what felt different about this was that they did sort of roar back to to be leading 3-2 in the latter stages of the game after being 2-1 down, and then to sort of, as you say, it is a great strike, but preventable like they all are. And I think that's sort of like it's the number of goals that Hibs have conceded in the final 10 minutes. It's the fact that it was a problem last season and it's still a problem this season with different personnel. And it's David Gray spoke about it afterwards and said it was something that we'd have to address. And there is a bit of a school of thought, which is this sort of falls on David Gray as the head coach, but at the same time, he can do all the coaching in the world on the training ground and say, if there's a last minute cross, this is what you do. This is what happens if we're defending in the sort of final 90 seconds. Ultimately, it's up to the players to do that once they're on the pitch. Obviously, if they're not doing it, then something's not right. But whether it's just concentration levels, players switching off, whatever it is, it's continued to be an Achilles heel for Hibs. And I think it is that sort of feeling of what might have been if they were only able to sort of stop this from being a recurring theme. And I think it's this season, I think from the games where they conceded late goals that have had a material impact on the outcome of the game, it's been 2 points instead of 8 points. And I don't think I need to tell any Hibs fans where 8 points would have them in the table. It would have them a point ahead of Motherwell. It would have them right in the mix with Celtic and Rangers, which just sort of adds to the whole feeling of a missed opportunity this season. Despite the fact that it has been quite good for Hibs. You look at their points total this season compared to this point last season, they've got, I think, a couple more points than they did. The expected goals value is higher. So, things are looking good, but it's just, I think, with the background of everything else, that's what's making the season feel underwhelming, and the late goals certainly aren't helping.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's that preventability that's the most frustrating thing. That it is a moment of real quality, and these things do happen. I mean, the concrete strike is wonderful. Salinger wasn't really getting near that, but there are a couple of moments in the build-up. I think there's the initial ball into the box that then I think Rocky heads away. Decent enough clearance, does its job, clears the ball. It does then get intercepted. There's a chance to sort of stop that ball going out. I can't remember, was it Astley to Congreve? Mm-hmm. There's maybe a chance to get an interception in there. There's maybe a chance to sort of get a body in front of Congreve, because it is it's absolute last gasp. And I see too a lot of the blame getting apportioned different ways. It's difficult. It's difficult because you think back to the Edinburgh derbies at Tynecastle. I mean, both late goals are very preventable, and there are moments of quality from Hearts for both of them. Don't take anything away, I don't think, but there are opportunities for Hibs to stop those. And I think when all is said and done, I mean, likewise, you don't need to tell anybody what that points difference would make. And I think the most frustrating thing is looking at it and realizing that it's not 8 points gone by things that you didn't have the power to do anything about. it's 8 goals gone because of, like you say, sloppy mistakes or just switching off at that crucial moment, not seeing the game all the way through. I think certainly from the media perspective, once the McGrath goal goes in at Dens Park, I mean, it feels, and I'm not on the pitch, but it feels almost like job done. I felt the wrath of some Dundee fans for posting more or less exactly that, posting the celebrations of the Hibs fans as they went. Patrick, you were very annoyed about me. I was very annoyed with myself. I won't do it again, I promise. But
there's such a thing as a jinx. I mean, that's the thing, you know. You're just asking for trouble.
I've learned my lesson. I was just so excited about all the singing. It was great. But there is that element that it did feel like job done, and I don't think it didn't look too nervy. I mean, sort of watching Hibs games, that when you've got 5 minutes of added time and you're a goal up, I mean, there is always that sense of nervousness that something can happen. There could be an equaliser. There could be a mistake. It didn't feel like that at all until the ball comes towards in the 95th minute, and then those little preventable errors sneak in, as they have done this season. And I think that's just the most frustrating part. I don't need to tell anybody that, but it's very frustrating. Patrick, you mentioned we would come on to talking about subs, and I think Dundee was a great example of that. 2 very good subs in particular, I thought, were Martin Boyle, who comes on, has an impact more or less immediate. I don't remember exactly when he was subbed on, but gets that assist through to Ante Schuto, the ball that Schuto takes that wonderful touch from. Schuto obviously being the other impact sub, who takes the touch, makes a little step around McCracken, and then puts it away. You mentioned Kai Andrews as well, obviously having the impact coming off the bench for his debut against Rangers, getting the goal against Celtic. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, he tees up Jamie McGrath for the 3rd goal.
He did, and it was him who won the ball back in midfield, leading to Schuto's goal. So you could argue, you know, an involvement in sort of the 2nd and 3rd goals, following on from his goal at Celtic Park, which is what you want to see your subs doing. And, you know, there's been times on these shows in previous weeks where we've maybe been a little bit critical, maybe a bit strong, but we've certainly kind of questioned some of the subs that have been made and potentially the timing of them. And you know, I think it's difficult because you can never predict how a sub is going to have an impact. Like, you know, you see headlines all the time, subs who come on in the 75th minute and they get booked in the 76th and sent off in the 78th. You see subs who come on and score own goals. You see subs who come on and score winners. We've seen that quite a lot with Ante Schuto. We saw it with Kai Andrews. We've seen it with other players this season as well. And I think it's that sort of thing where, you know, David Gray does his I mean, I've lost count of the number of times he said this last season and this season as well. But the team that starts is never the team that finishes. It's absolutely right. And, you know, I think we really are seeing the benefits of having a stronger bench going into the last part of the season. And I think, you know, with this bounce game coming up this weekend, which we'll talk about in a moment, David Gray has an opportunity to get, you know, some game time into players who maybe not had that much recently because they are coming back from injuries. You know, people like Chris Cadden, Grant Hanley, Joe Newell's another one, Josh Campbell, again, somebody who's not had an awful lot of game time recently. He had that injury, which kept him out until I think the end of January, start of February time. And I think that, you know, if Hibs are to salvage something from this season, if they are to finish the season strongly and, you know, potentially do the unthinkable, which is, you know, unseat Motherwell, that obviously has to be the aim at the moment, catching the team in front, then, you know, they're going to need the bench. They're going to need, you know, players who are equally capable of starting games and coming off the bench and having the same sort of impact. So, you know, you can look at Martin Boyle, who's been, you know, very much a talisman at Hibs for the majority of his years at the club. And, you know, having him coming off the bench at times is probably more useful than having him start, because you need that kind of leadership, you need that control, that kind of, I don't know what you call it, but just that, I suppose that sort of nous, you know, coming off the bench. It's not like you're throwing on a sort of 19-year-old from the youth team and just saying, go and run about and make a nuisance of yourself. You can give him instructions. You can say, the coaching staff can say, this is how we want you to play. This is what we want you to do. This is what we want you to target. This is where we want you to, but this is where we want you to play, because, you know, a bit of an unfamiliar role for him against Dundee when he came on, and that he was sort of playing sort of like the left of a kind of front three or a kind of 4-2-3-1. He was sort of playing wide left, which isn't a position he's played an awful lot. But he gets an assist out of it, and it's a really good goal to set up Shuto. Obviously, Shuto does the bulk of the heavy lifting in the build-up with trapping the ball out of the sky, and then that little touch to get out from his feet, and then obviously finishing past McCracken. But I think subs has been a bit of an issue for Hibs over the past 2 seasons. We've seen there have been occasions when the subs have worked really well. We've talked about this. I've written pieces about it. And there's been times where the subs have seemed a little bit not strange, but just kind of unusual in the sense that it's maybe not the obvious change to make. And I think that depends on how David Gray's trying to manage games, what he's trying to get out of games. There are always, it's very easy sitting in the press box or sitting in the stands and just sort of saying, well, if I was the manager, I would have done X, Y, and Z. And I think I'm always struck by managers who say that watching the games from the touchline is very different to watching the game from sort of like a higher perspective. Like you see the game differently. So I just wonder whether that sometimes maybe has a little bit of an impact. And obviously all the data, all the metrics they have on the players in terms of their stamina, their fitness, that sort of comes into it as well. And obviously you need to have a level of control late in the game if you're trying to get back into a game, if you're trying to hold on to a lead, then you need to have players who can come on and do a job. They need to be switched on, the concentration levels need to be there. And there needs to be good communication as well, because I think there's probably been times that Hibs have conceded late goals where it does come down to communication. Somebody's not said, who's picking up that player, or I'm going to pick him up. But I think for if we look at the Celtic game, we look at the Dundee United game, the 3-2 game recently, we look at Dundee, I think we are sort of starting to see the subs coming off the bench more frequently and having an impact rather than just coming on as a pair of fresh legs. And I think, that could be really, really important going down to like the final few games of the season. As I said at when we're talking about the late goals, Hibs have scored a fair few late goals themselves. So, it might very well be that they end up relying on that for, getting a couple of results over the line that could ultimately be, pivotal in how the season pans out. So I think if you're going to have a big squad to choose from and a bench packed full of options who can come on and really make a difference, then, there's not really a better time to have that.
Well, we've always said here that having a big squad and having good options is a great headache to have. And knowing that you can start a game in one way, finish it in another, and have players who are proving that they can come on and make an impact, or start the game and make an impact equally, will be very useful as Hibs approach the split. Finally, we'll touch on the Barents game. Obviously, David Gray saying that there's a fixture scheduled, what with Scottish Cup action being at this weekend, Hibs not having a competitive game. Patrick, you've mentioned a few people in your article who we could be seeing in that game. Obviously, we've got the likes of Gary Nanga, Josh Campbell, Alassane Mane too, who's been around on the sidelines warming up, but has yet to make an appearance from the bench. Joe Newell is another one that comes to mind, obviously having a little bit of involvement, but still recovering from that long-term sort of double injury. Any other names that come to mind?
I think it was interesting with David Gray talking about trying to deload some players, just in terms of how much game time they've had. You look at people like, I think, Raphael Salinger. I think you look at Jamie McGrath, another one. I think Jack Iredale as well. And probably the likes of kind of Warren O'Hora, Rocky Bashiri. Players who've all, had a lot of minutes who, could probably benefit from a little bit of a rest. And I think, when you have bounce games, it's always very much a controlled environment. So, you could sort of, the two teams could speak to each other before and say, look, we're not going to be going sort of hell for leather into challenges. It's a kind of an opportunity. It's usually the same for both teams that, they're trying things out. They're maybe bringing players back from injury. So, I think it's quite a good test for David Gray to be able to see where certain players are at. I'm not going to sit here and try and work out a kind of starting 11 and a sort of second half 11 or anything like that. But I imagine Jordan Smith must surely be in line to get some minutes. I would think Gary Nanga, like you said, Grant Hanley, obviously back in training, I think the tail end of last week. So, possible he gets some game time, assuming everything's gone smoothly since with his rehab, and just to sort of see where he's at. Same with Chris Cadden. Same with Joe Newell. I think Rudy Molotnikov, potentially another one who could be getting a bit of game time as well. And yeah, I mean, kind of take your pick from the forwards, really. Eli Yuan, I would imagine, is another one who be looking at getting more game time, because I think when you look at the minutes that the players have played, I think he's still in three figures. He's still yet to kind of break the 1,000-minute mark. There's a couple of others in that sort of in that area as well, who I think would be kind of prime candidates. Not obviously counting new signings and things like that, but players would be prime candidates for getting a bit of game time. And we've seen Hibs move to this sort of back four a few times recently, and it's potentially a chance for them to to work a bit more on that, to see if something works. In a game where obviously the coaching staff can make these changes, they can try things out, and if it doesn't come off, then that's fine. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I suppose, how much we hear about the game, and who features, and I think how if that'll tell us anything going into the next game against Livingston. But ultimately, I can imagine the coaching staff would really just be wanting the players who are coming back after injury to get through it unscathed and just take another step kind of forward in their recovery, and trying to get them back on the pitch as soon as possible, and fighting for places, and just increasing that competition, which David Gray speaks about on a regular basis, just to kind of keep everyone on their toes going into the final few games of the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely, and looking to have some freshness in the legs from the whole squad, as it will be very much all hands on deck with 4 games to come before the split. We'll be back talking to you next Wednesday on the podcast, and we'll hopefully have some news to speak about from that bounce game, and plenty more to discuss before then on the Hibs Observer's website, on the Hibs Observer app, and across our social media channels as well. So do follow us on all of them to stay notified and keep up to date with what we're up to here at the Hibs Observer. Thanks very much for tuning in today, or afterwards once it's uploaded onto YouTube. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will see you next Wednesday. Bye for now.